if I may just follow this point. So our national defense, in terms of stopping ISIL from killing thousands or millions of Americans if they get the capability, really comes down to whether or not we can convince the Arab world to go in there and defeat these guys?
It really comes down to building a coalition so that what the Arab Muslim world sees is them rejecting ISIS, not
They
us
already
defeating them.
reject ISIL. Do you know any major Arab ally that embraces ISIL?
I know major Arab allies who fund them.
Yeah, but did they embrace that? They fund them because the Free Syrian Army couldn't fight Assad. They were trying to beat Assad. I think they realized the folly of their ways. Let's don't taint the Mideast unfairly.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Greene. You're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. Today I want to talk about links to Saudi Arabia, Obama's ISIS strategy, and take a top-down, big-level approach to what to expect next with this war in Syria, and more specifically, the war against ISIS. Now, of course, this has been building for some time. As part of the Obama strategy, Obama has been scapegoating a couple fake beheadings as the entire reason for an attack on not just Iraq, but also Syria. And of course, the propagandization of ISIS is being entirely used so the Obama administration can target Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which has always been the intention. Now, yesterday, the Congress passed with an overwhelming bipartisan vote and essentially legalized. This is now moving to the Senate and expected to pass the Senate in the coming days, have essentially legalized the arming of moderate terrorists on the ground in places like Iraq and Syria in order to fight ISIS. Now, essentially what's happening is instead of sending U.S. troops, boots on the ground, as Obama has said time and time again he would not do, he's still sending boots on the ground essentially, but instead of sending Americans, which I would argue, even though I oppose an intervention in this part of the world, it's all, of course, been part of the master plan and choreographed, would be better than arming terrorists, what he calls moderates, with direct links to al-Qaeda and groups like the al-Nusra Front. Of course, all of this spiraling out of control in recent years. It's the same strategy that George W. Bush implemented that has only helped to propel ISIS, instead of sending our own troops, which even our military advisors are advising for. He's going to arm instead radical terrorists, what he calls moderates.
This is not and will not be America's fight alone. One of the things we've learned over this last decade is America can make a decisive difference. But I want to be clear. The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. They will support Iraqi forces on the ground.
But terrorists on the ground with weapons of war to fight the new boogeyman. Now, of course, al-Qaeda has just morphed into ISIS as a result of direct intervention from the George W. Bush administration, the leftover of weapons of wars, of military-grade gear, tanks, etc., which is now all being used by ISIS to create this radical Islamic caliphate in the Middle East. Now, what's important to know with this arming of Syrian terrorists, what Obama calls rebels and moderates, is that he's authorizing up to 5,000 of these terrorists, of which will be trained in Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, many of you are familiar with the direct links of the Saudi government to al-Qaeda, to Osama bin Laden, and also the historic September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, not just in Washington, D.C., but of course, New York City. I believe it's either 14 or 15 of the 19 terrorists or so responsible supposedly, allegedly, for the 9/11 terror attacks were all Saudis and all linked back to Saudi Arabia. In fact, it's important to note that Prince Bandar bin Sultan, the head of Saudi intelligence, was actually seen with George W. Bush just a few short days after the September 11th terror attacks. And elites that were located, Saudi elites located in the United States, were allowed to travel freely back to Saudi Arabia post that cover-up, post that event. In fact, several pages, some 25 pages, odd pages or so, of the redacted official quote-unquote 9/11 investigation. That missing part, many have surmised, has direct links again to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia with direct links and funding links to Al-Qaeda and groups like ISIS. And again, this isn't speculation. This has been confirmed by several independent sources over the years. Just like Ghouta, the chemical attacks that the United States and Syria were trying to frame around Bashar al-Assad as being the responsible culprit for this humanitarian war crime, it took Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists like Seymour Hersh with his piece Who's Sarin, and also leaders at the United Nations, people like Carla Del Ponte, to do third-party investigations, only to conclude that it wasn't Bashar al-Assad's government responsible for the deadly sarin gas attack that again killed men, women, and children, a war crime, but it was actually the terrorists on the ground.
Chemical weapons were used, in particular nervine gas, and what appeared on to our investigation that that was used by the opponents, by the rebels, and we have no indication at all that the government, Syria, the authority of the Syria government have used chemical weapons.
That the Obama administration has been sponsoring, funding, and arming. These are the same terrorists that the United States federal government will now be training and arming in Saudi Arabia specifically, over 5,000 of them to start. And they'll also be filtering funds from the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, an estimate of $500 million, maybe up to $1 billion to fund this war. Now they're going to pitch it to the American people like they're not aggregating new funds, that it's not new funds, it's just a continuation of the expenditures from the George W. Bush years in Iraq and Afghanistan. Again, all this language about no boots on the ground, in my opinion, really has to do with the president's ego. Of course, I oppose opposition and intervention in this part of the world because it's been part of the game plan, the master plan, for some time now. This is what we've been talking about for over 5 years. But we would actually be better off with U.S. troops on the ground that we could trust, whether instead of arming the Syrian opposition and Syrian terrorists on the ground. So when the president says no boots on the ground, he's still sending boots. Instead of American boots, he's arming 5,000 radical terrorists with weapons of war, training them in Saudi Arabia with direct links to funding Al-Qaeda in the September 11, 2001 terror attack, and sending them instead. You know, it's my prediction, of course I don't have a crystal ball, but it is my prediction that not only will there be troops, and I mean U.S. troops on the ground in the not too distant future, I actually think that there will be a draft instituted here in the United States because we won't have enough manpower, men and women. We will need more boots on the ground in this part of the world in the not too distant future. Now, the way that they'll sell that to the American people, by that time, it'll be self-evident to Americans and the global population that this just isn't a war in Syria and Iraq, but this is in fact a global conflict and is a world war. And that is how the Obama administration will justify sending more U.S. troops as well as instituting a draft here in the United States of America. Again, the fomenting of ISIS, the creation of ISIS, the arming of these terrorists on the ground with direct links to Al-Qaeda, the Al-Nusra Front as a specific example, has only morphed into the radical terrorist organization that makes up ISIS today. And all it took for the president to sell the American people to garner overwhelming support for a war that Americans once opposed just a month ago was a couple fake beheadings. That's all Americans needed to see was a couple fake beheadings, and now 60% of the American population, according to recent polls, supports this new war, supports this new intervention. You see how easy it is to move the masses and move the public psyche in the direction of war, playing into the fear and propagandizing this to the American people. Again, ISIS, a radical terrorist organization that wasn't even in the public consciousness 6 months ago, that now many Americans think we should bomb the shit out of and totally annihilate the entire Middle East. Again, the sight has always been on Bashar al-Assad, and Bashar al-Assad really essentially is a dead man walking. And this is precisely what these airstrikes have been about in Iraq, the fomenting of ISIS. So Obama and the New World Order cartel could target Syria specifically. And now we have Congress and soon to be more than likely the Senate approving not just the arming of up to 5,000 terrorists on the ground, but also U.S. airstrikes in both Iraq and Syria. And folks, this is the world war. This is the world engagement. I also wanted to note that with the Ebola scare, the president is also sending up to 3,000 U.S. troops to parts of sub-Saharan Africa and establishing command centers in this part of the world. Also note that Libya, we've been at war with, the president bypassed Congress again not too long ago and ousted Muammar Gaddafi with his implicit and indirect murder. Now, I can't help but question that in addition to the 5,000 Syrian rebels on the ground that Obama will be arming to fight Bashar al-Assad, his government, what they call and are scamming basically the American people as ISIS, when really the target is Bashar al-Assad's head. I can't help but think that they're also establishing command centers through the smoke screen that makes up the Ebola outbreak in Africa and parts of this world. Again, all of this connected, all of this linked to Russia, all of this linked to China and the New World War, with the ultimate end goal. When the United States is finished with Iraq and Syria, the next target is Iran. I'm Christopher Greene. Get this out everywhere, make it viral, hard-hitting it in your face, and click the link below to support our sponsor.